Would you like some job insight and career advice from a top recruiter in the medical coding and HIM field? Follow me. Hey everyone, I'm Victoria. I'm a medical coder, auditor, educator, content creator, and on my channel I provide tips, tricks, and tutorials because I want you to be successful in your medical coding career. I took the top questions you've been asking in my comment section as well as the ones from the community tab and put them together to form this interview, so let's get into it. So Bertram is a recruiting leader in the HIM industry, and he's the founder of Renowned Talent, which helps recruit and staff highly qualified candidates in HIM and actually in IT as well. So Bertram has helped recruit tons of medical coders, healthcare sales executives, EMR implementation specialists, financial analysts, transcriptionists, medical scribes, project managers, tons of people in just the healthcare field in general. And I brought Bertram here today because I get so many questions from viewers about job search stuff and interviewing skills. And I've interviewed and hired a handful of medical coders, but I can speak to my personal experiences doing that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that my personal experiences are generally what happens in the healthcare field. So I don't want to make anyone get the impression that my personal experiences reflect the entirety of what's going on in the industry. So I brought Bertram here today because I think this will be extremely beneficial to help answer some of those questions that I've been getting and provide something outside of just my personal insight. So thank you so much, Bertram, for agreeing to come onto my YouTube channel today to
Yeah,
help
Victoria,
out
thank
my
you for
viewers.
having me.
Yeah. So the first question that I want to get into is one that I get a lot because I have so many, stay-at-home moms that want to get into medical coding. So,
Okay.
when you're a mother, you often take a small chunk of time off to take care of raising your children. So I get asked a lot, do I still need to explain those gaps in my employment history?
So to answer your first question, I would say yes. It's always good to be truthful and to answer, those questions when you're asked. But depending on the application, I wouldn't necessarily put it on the resume. So like let's say someone, had a 2-year gap or a 3-year gap. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, stay-at-home mom on the resume for 3 or so years. Just leave the gap be very apparent on your resume. And then if asked during the interview, oh, why did you have that gap of employment, that's when you can go into the reasons why. But that's always a very good opportunity as well to talk about what you've been doing to stay engaged in the industry. Have you been reviewing your coding clinics? Have you been getting additional certifications? Just because you were off, you want to show your potential employers and future employers that you're still engaged in the industry and developing those skills. Because especially with COVID, we have all had to take some type of break. We've all had to make some type of adjustments. A lot of, as you said, Victoria, stay-at-home moms, maybe they are working, but now due to everything and the kids being at home, now they have to stay at home or work much less. So just explaining those situations, but still helping the employers know why you are still and how you're still being engaged in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that is really important. And that's something that's come up in the past when I've been involved in interviews is we've asked people, how have you been keeping up? Even not necessarily maybe in relationship to gaps, but even, oh, you've worked you were certified in professional coding, but you've been working in outpatient coding. How have you kept up with professional coding in that time? And then that's when you can have that conversation of, oh yeah, I've been doing my healthcare business monthly in these webinars and so forth. Yeah, so that's a great tip. So how important is it to have a quality resume and do some of these more fancy resume templates that have come out where you can put in your photo and have different colors and bar graphs and stuff? Are those important? Do they stand out more than your traditional type of resume?
I think a resume is almost like having a really good meal. It's more about the quality of what's on there. I know as of recent, we've probably seen some very famous CEO or former CEOs of big companies like Yahoo. I remember a couple of years ago, this resume was floating around and it had a picture, it had all of these graphs, it had like a personality assessment, and all that stuff is great. But if you just go to like, let's say your Microsoft Word and you type out a really strong resume with your experience, it's I would say a strong resume content and the quality of resume is going to be over all of the flash, because you can have all of the flash but not necessarily have the skills needed or experience needed for the job. Another thing I get commonly asked is about pictures. Well, Bertram, I see there's a trend right now of pictures being on resumes. Due to the discrimination laws and those types of things in America, some companies are leaning against having those types of things because they don't want to say, oh, we didn't happen to employ this or hire this person due to something like that. So on the eastern side of the world, let's say Europe or Asia, having pictures on resumes, even like India, for example, is extremely popular and even a requirement. They want to verify that the person that applied for the job is the same person that comes for the interview, et cetera, right? But in America, it hasn't really been the trend. What I would do, I would keep that really professional profile picture and those types of pictures, or the picture you're going to use on that resume on your LinkedIn profile.
Mhm.
That's where your LinkedIn profile comes in handy. But I would say a really strong resume is what it's all about. I remember we had this job that we had to recruit this very specialized skill set for. And I'm telling you, this person's resume probably had less than 50 words on the resume, but they had the certifications and they had the experience needed, and only like 2 or 3 employers listed. So it's really about the content and the quality of that resume.
That is amazing feedback, and thank you, because I think that's something I personally have even done, and maybe not necessarily something for someone who's just starting out, but because I'm someone who
Mm-hmm.
has more advanced and has many years of experience, there's only a couple of things I know that they are really looking for. So I don't have to list as much stuff maybe as someone who feels that they have to prove themselves more. Like I can list, oh, these are the couple of things I know that they're looking for, and I can
Right.
just show this experience with these 3 bullet points. So that's great.
Absolutely.
So in follow up to that, how far back should someone go on their resume?
My recommendation is 10 to 15 years. I'm not really a big person, and I know that there's always going to be discrimination out there in the marketplace, but some people use this 10 to 15 years saying that, well, you don't want to age yourself too much, and if you put 20 years, they're going to calculate. And I don't necessarily believe that's going to happen, but I think it comes down to relevancy. Like, let's say you worked at Starbucks, as a barista 15, 20 years ago, whatever. Like, is that really relevant? And can you still make that macchiato as well as you did back then when you're doing on a daily day basis? And what I am missing a lot on resumes is people have a lot of experience listed, and that's fantastic, but what is it relevant to? So I would say go 10 to 15 years of relevant experience. And for those who are just starting out, you definitely want to have your education filling these gaps where you may not have a lot of that experience. But my general rule is 10 to 15 years. And that's usually for a resume. And we have to remember, when you look at the definition of resume, a resume is really a short and concise, limited to 2 pages type of document. So when you're having something that's like, you know, 5, 10, 15 pages talking about publications, speaking engagements, now you're getting more into a CV. A CV is what we usually use when we are trying to show our expertise in a subject matter. Or yes, we've been involved in the industry for 50 years. That's when that is fine, right? When we're trying to get on the Forbes articles and stuff. But when you're just applying online, usually you want to have it short and sweet. And if you have a longer resume, usually save that for your hiring manager or for those people interviewing you prior to the interview.
Great, great, great. So in reflection then to experience, one of the top questions I also get is the apprentice status for coders. So
Okay.
there's ways that you can get that apprentice 2-year status removed by going through like a practicum, by going through an approved curriculum through the AAPC. So
Mm-hmm.
while you don't have officially 2 years of experience, you do have your apprentice status removed. So do you have any insight on how employers are viewing the 2 years of experience versus the apprentice status removal?
So I look at them as 2 things. I think whatever we can do to get that A removed from the apprentice status is like the big thing. And for those folks that may have, let's say, a CCA, doing whatever you have to do so you can qualify and test so you can get your CCS, right? But when we have that apprentice status or when we lack the experience, unfortunately, there's really no substitute in the marketplace for experience. My golden rule is that experience is golden. We all need to have the experience. And when we are able to get those first jobs within, let's say, HIM, recruiting, whatever it is, you really want to be able to show that even from a very low level of experience, you were able to pick up and get going very quickly. I remember when I got started in recruiting, they only put me like on a 90-day kind of test period. And I know that if I did not really get it going within those 60 days, they were probably going to have a talk, hey, Bertram, if you're not performing in 4 weeks, we may have to have a different conversation. You may have to go to a different department. And we have to remember that when it comes to coding, billing, and HIM, a lot of that deals with reimbursement. On a $1 million chart, 5%, 95% accuracy is a loss of $50,000, everyone. So this is directly tied to reimbursement and how things work within those healthcare centers. So I know that's like the hugest frustration everybody has. How do I get those A's removed and those types of things? You have to be very creative. You have to find a way to get within the HM department. You have to find the employers that will be able to give you a chance, but there's really no, replacement for experience. In my hiring experience, I haven't been able to say, hey, somebody has taken this coursework or this practicum in replacement of experience. It hasn't flown by a lot of the employers. But as you said earlier, Victoria, we cannot speak for everybody. So if you're able to find someone that accepts it, you definitely want to do that research. You want to follow through.
Yeah. So thank you. I think that does give some extra insight, and this is kind of on par with what I was thinking, that the experience versus the apprentice status removal. Obviously, you want to go and get your apprentice status removed as quickly as possible, but it really can't quite for most employers replace that actual 2 years of experience, because there is, I always say, a liability with new coders. It's nothing against new coders, but there is that little bit of risk involved with hiring someone who doesn't have the experience, compared to someone who does have the experience. Okay. So moving along, I get a lot of questions too about remote coding. Okay. So there's seems to be this interest, and I think because of these trends we're seeing with tiny homes and traveling and that sort of thing. One of the questions that's been popping up a lot is, do you think employers would allow coders to work as like traveling coders? Because we have a lot of remote work, but could they like work out of an RV and travel from place to place working remotely?
So from what I've seen and from my experience, it really depends. Some employers require their employees to be within a state or a certain location. Even when it comes to a lot of us are working remotely these days, right? So even the let's say the voice over IP or internet phones they provide us, they need to know our location just in case we call 911. They need to know electronically where to send that 911 signal. And we're all like, well, we have cell phones. I'm not going to call the emergency services from my work phone, but just in case. So you need to be very clear with your employer, and you need to see what their requirements are. I've seen some be very open to it as long as you have a very strong internet connection. They don't necessarily care whether it's a RV, mobile home, tiny home at the back of a big truck kind of thing. But you want to make sure a lot of healthcare systems are very sensitive about their work being done outside of the 50 continental United States. So I've had even some folks say, hey, Bertram, I have a vacation home in the Virgin Islands. Can I work for your prior company, former company, or this employer? Some do not allow it, even though those are US territories. So you always want to make sure either with your recruiter or HR representative, if you are able to have that flexibility and just being open with them about what you're looking to do, because they may or may not be able to allow it. Even if you're working for a vendor, it may not necessarily be the vendor. Sometimes the health system doesn't allow it. So you just want to be very open and honest about that as well.
Yeah, and I think there are also considerations even as far as connectivity. If you're sitting in the middle of the Rockies somewhere, are you going to have a good, secure internet connection that no one's going to be able to get into and start taking health information? So that's another thing I think to consider. So with working remotely, and you mentioned that a lot of us are working remotely right now, do you feel that in light of this pandemic and suddenly now an increase has happened with our remote workers, do you feel that there may be a new trend that will allow more remote workers or allow newer employees to start working remotely, where in past we've had to say, oh, well, we have to be here for a year, or you have to hit a certain quality percentage and productivity percentage before we will let you work remotely? Do you foresee that we'll have some laxity there in remote working?
Over the years, there's definitely been a lot more relaxed. In the past, as a recruiter, I actually had to verify how many years of remote medical coding experience somebody had and document it. And now I've seen it become, and then it was like more, oh, well, has this person worked remotely? And now it's more of, it is a remote position. So the trend is definitely there, But once again, I can't speak for every healthcare system because some local healthcare systems need to hire locally. You'll come on site to train, and then after a certain amount of period of time, they're allowing you to be remote. Some, I have an opening right now. They just want to make sure that somebody understands and gets introduced to all of their team members, and then they'll allow them to work remotely. So that one as well depends, but the trend is definitely getting to more of a relaxed requirement around working remotely.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some shifting that's happened with the pandemic. And I think from my experience, I'm starting to see more places that are recognizing that a lot of the things that they did in person, like orientation, can now take place remotely. So,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
So this question came in and I thought it was an interesting one. And I thought as a recruiter, you might have some insight on it because I've all the jobs that I've been hired for, at least initially, were in-person jobs and then maybe eventually transitioned remote. And someone had asked, do companies that hire a lot of remote coders require drug testing?
They can. And I recently had some folks on assignment through my company. And yes, every single one of them, even though they would never be on site, we did require, or it was a requirement for them to go through a drug screen. So what happened was the employers had the forms, and all that they said was, hey, these are our requirements. So even though now it's a remote job, they're just moving those requirements for the remote employees. They're not changing and saying, oh, well, it's remote, so now we're not going to require the drug screen. So it definitely can, and that's another thing that you can verify with the HR, with the recruiters that you're talking to.
So then the last question I have is again in regards to remote positions. And it came up recently when I was talking to some of my colleagues who interview coders, and they had said that they've been experiencing lately with the people that are being interviewed remotely via Skype or FaceTime
Mm.
or Zoom, that there's not the appropriate etiquette, that people are maybe on their phone and they're walking around their house as they're talking to the person that they're interviewing. So do you have any tips for coders that are now interviewing remotely that you could share?
So the first tip is you need to treat it just as you would a regular interview. So, if you're going to be meeting with a hiring manager, I mean, first impressions are everything, or a recruiter, whoever you're going to be speaking to, and you want to verify whether it's a phone interview or a video interview. You don't want to just show up and not be prepared, right? So you always want to verify those things as well. And just treat it as a regular interview. So the same professional dress that you would, whether it's tie for gentlemen or nice dresses, blouses for ladies, you want to make sure that you have those. And second thing you want to do, you want to test. So for example, we are using Zoom right now. What I would do is I would download Zoom on my computer or on my phone and test where I'm going to take it, the background, and if you can hear your microphone, the video, whatever you're going to use, and then just being ready and having that dedicated time for it. Yes, a lot of hiring managers and recruiters, we're also working remotely and let's say out of our offices, right? We may have kids come in, we may have a barking dog in the background. I think people are being understandable about that, but we still want to make sure that everything that's within our control is to the best of our control, as that may be taken into consideration. Because what that hiring manager and recruiter is going to think is, well, if this is how they took a video interview, imagine how they may work while they're with us or interact with our clients and those types of things.
I think that was super, super helpful. And yeah, I know there's definitely some laxity that we're getting right now. I was doing physician education, I think, a couple days ago and had forgotten to lock my back door here. And my kid just barged right in her pajamas in the middle of it. And we just kind of laughed. And I told her to go downstairs and grab her breakfast, and it was all good. But yeah, under normal circumstances, I typically don't allow my kid.
Exactly. It's always the one thing that we forget, and it's like, here they come. Almost like that video or that thing that went viral on CNN a few months or a year ago, right? The
Yep, yep.
gentleman's trying to have this professional CNN interview, and then what happens? The kids come in, and the mom kind of like, I don't know, like spider arms, like the kids to come go back. So
Yep. And
it's
now we're
definitely
all CNN dad.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Bertram, for your time. So if any of my viewers want to get a hold of you for any reason, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
So whether it is Twitter, LinkedIn, I have a little bit more presence and I push out a little more content on there. I also do have a YouTube channel as well. Infancy compared to Victoria and everything that she's doing. but that's renowned talent as well. But yeah, just Bertram Lansiquot on any social media platforms. I also do have an Ask a Recruiter video series. I try my best to help educate people just and just best practices, whether it be resumes and such. So you can always reach out to me. But hopefully, this was helpful. And thank you again, Victoria, for having me. It was definitely a pleasure. And I hope all these tips will be very helpful. And just remember, everyone, we're going through a very tough time right now. Everybody's being very understandable, but you have to just keep on going. It's always been hard to get your first job straight out of the gate. It's always been hard to, to reposition and change careers. But just because it's hard doesn't mean that you should stop. It means that you should probably just try a little bit harder. So if there's anything that Victoria and myself can do, just let us know. And if you really like this episode and you'd like us to, do it again in the future, just let us know. We're always here to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bertram. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
I hope you found that video. I hope you found that as helpful as I hope you found that as insightful as I did. Go and definitely check out Bertram. I hope you found that as helpful as I did, and I hope you found that as insightful as I did. Be sure to go into I hope you found that as insightful as I did. Make sure you go and check out Bertram's YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you get alerts when I post new episodes, because I post wonderful content like this every single week to help you guys out. I will see you in the next episode, and until then, just keep on coding on.